Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Advocacy 101. We have quite a good turnout today, so let's get started. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you are here today. My name is Tamina Chaudhary. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Campaign Strategy here at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I'm joined by my colleague, John Threkold. He's Alliance's Senior Congressional Affairs Manager, and also Alec Vanderberg, our analyst at the Policy and Programs team. Before we dive in, I want to take a quick moment to set the tone for today's session. The Alliance is deeply committed to making sure our spaces like this one reflect diversity, inclusion, and respect. Alec, I think you can go to the next slide. There it is. We welcome all, all voices and perspectives. We also have a zero tolerance policy for any form of discrimination, harassment, or abusive behavior. If you ever experience or witness anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, please let any Alliance staff member know right away. We want this to be a safe space where everyone feels empowered to speak up, ask questions, and engage fully. Please note that all attendees are muted, but you can send your questions using the, sorry, next slide, Alec. I'm going too fast. There it is. Please note that all attendees are muted. You can send your questions using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, preferably not on the chat. And this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with others who could not attend today. With that, let's get started. Next slide, please. Whether you are new to advocacy or already doing it in your community, this session is designed to give you practical tools to strengthen that work, to help you think more strategically about how to build power, shape policy, and create change that lasts. Today, we will start from the very beginning. We will cover the what, why, and how of advocacy. We will go a little bit deeper into the various manifestations of advocacy, how you can engage with others working in homelessness or intersectional areas, and how to build relationship with your members of Congress. Next slide, please. So advocacy is a buzzword. We often use it for various things. I want to get a sense of what comes to your mind when you hear the word advocacy. Can you drop it in the chat in a word or two what you understand by advocacy? Speaking up, yep. Influence, support, empowering, having a voice, absolutely. Educating, standing the gap, informing, speaking on behalf of folks, absolutely. You've covered all of it. So there are different kinds of advocacy, as you can see, and we will go into those today. So advocacy is really at the heart of what we do here at the Alliance, because ending homelessness isn't just about programs, it's about systems. And systems change when people advocate. At its core, advocacy about influence decisions that affect people's lives, decisions that, I'm so sorry, oh, there, you're on the right slide. Oh, sorry, decisions that take shape through policy. And we do that by various ways, educating, persuading, mobilizing, and others. But I want you to think of advocacy as something bigger than just meeting with lawmakers, which many of you already do. It's about changing the conditions that create inequity. It's about ensuring that people most affected by homelessness have a seat and a voice at the table where those decisions are being made. Next slide, please. Policy determines who gets resources, who has rights, and who is represented. When we advocate, we're helping shape those outcomes. We are not just reaching out to policies. We're not only reacting to policies, we're actively helping to design them. And when advocacy is done well, it does three things. It influences decisions and systems. It lifts up lived experience as expertise, and it builds community power so that change endures. So think of advocacy not as an event, but a process, a way to keep pushing for justice, access, and opportunity. Next slide, please. Now, advocacy can take many forms, and not all of them look like a rally at the Capitol. Sometimes it's a quiet meeting with a city council member to explain how a funding change would affect real people. Other times it's testifying at a hearing, or writing an op-ed, or sharing a personal story that makes an issue come alive. We can influence policy through data, sometimes through research, showing that the scale of a problem and solutions that work. We can also do it through storytelling, which is a very powerful tool in advocacy, giving policymakers and the public a human connection to the issue. Media and communications play a big role too. They shape the narrative and help public understand why the issue matters. And none of this happens in isolation. Advocacy is a team effort built on relationships with elected officials, with community members, with service providers, with researchers, and people with lived experience. Advocacy requires persistence. Policy change is rarely a quick fix or linear. It takes staying power, showing up again and again until the change sticks is the long-term investment in advocacy where you will find the most impact. Next slide, please. So identifying impact points is the most important step when you're thinking about advocacy. In this example, you'll see there are various impact points that's been identified. You can, for a given issue, you can educate the public. You can, by educating them, mobilize them. When you mobilize them, legislation moves forward. And once the legislation passes, the implementation is where you also can make an impact. So advocacy is a broader approach to influence and decision making that is not done only with members of Congress, with meeting with members of Congress, but it's an ongoing process with various layers, with various impact points. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So how do we decide when to use which tools? That's where strategy comes in. I like to think of advocacy as a continuous loop. You're always learning, adjusting, and refining your approach. It starts with defining the problem clearly. For example, what's the issue we are trying to solve? What's the policy to fix we're trying to fix or aiming for? Then you map out where power sits, where the impact points are, who makes the decision, who influences them, or understanding what landscape help us focus on efforts. Next, we craft the message, not just what we want, but how to talk about it with the right audience. The most effective advocates tailor their message to the moment and to the audience they're trying to reach. From there, we choose tactics. Maybe a public education campaign. Maybe it needs to be a meeting. Maybe we can do a coordinated push with other partners. The key to pick the right tactic for the goal is thinking broadly about the various stages of pressure points in advocacy, not the other way around. After each step we follow, advocacy needs to be reinforced and rechecked to see if the strategy is working. Advocacy doesn't end when a meeting is over. Building relationship means circling back, checking in, and staying visible. Finally, we reflect and adapt. Policy and politics change constantly. So should our strategies too. The most successful advocates are flexible, creative, and willing to learn as they go. Next slide, please. So there are various layers of advocacy. It's also important to remember that advocacy happens at multiple levels. They're all connected. A local innovation, for example, say a new homelessness prevention program in one city might become a model for a state policy or even influence national priorities. At the same time, federal legislation sets the tone and resources that guide local action. So our advocacy at one level strengthens advocacy on the other. For example, you might be working with local leaders on shelter expansion today, but that experience, those lessons can feed into broader advocacy efforts. The ecosystem is interconnected, and each layer of advocacy reinforces the others. Next slide, please. Cross-sectoral coalition building is another form of advocacy. One of the most powerful things we can do as advocates is to build coalitions, especially across sectors. Big policy wins rarely happen because of one organization or one campaign. They happen when different voices come together, like nonprofits, labor unions, businesses, researchers, community leaders, all aligning around a shared goal. Coalitions bring strength. They expand our reach, deepen our expertise, and lend credibility to our message. They also model the kind of collaboration we want to see reflected in the policy. But coalition work takes care and intentionality. It means managing relationships, sharing credit, and keeping everyone focused on the common purpose, even when there are differences in approach. When done right, coalitions don't just win policy fights. They shift systems and build lasting network of trust. And next slide, please. So before I hand it to my colleague, John, who's going to talk about congressional outreach, I want you to do four takeaways from this training. First, that advocacy isn't an add-on to our mission; it is part of the mission. Every time we speak up for better housing policies or share the realities of homelessness with decision makers, we're advancing the advancing the cause. Second, advocacy isn't just for policy experts or people with connections. Anyone can do it. What matters most are the relationships you build, the stories you tell, and you remaining persistent. Third, advocacy about showing up and following through. You don't need all the answers before you start. You just need to start. And finally, you already have all the tools you need for advocacy. Your lived experience, your community connections, your voice are enough, and your knowledge are enough. to be an advocate. You can find a whole host of resources on our website at endhomelessness.org/resources/advocacy. We constantly update all the resources there, and our goal is to equip you with the tools you need so that you can advocate in your communities. Before I close, actually, can you go to the next slide, Alec? I think, yeah, that's John. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, John, to walk you through congressional advocacy.
Good day, everybody, and thanks for taking the time to attend this webinar. First of all, let me say there's no one way to advocate. For the next few minutes, you'll hear my way. Please consider my remarks as giving you some things to think about as you come up with your own way to advocate. I should say thanks to Alec for the slides, and also that this presentation is adapted from a much longer one I did it at a recent Alliance conference with my Alliance colleagues, Ken and Samantha, and of course, the great Colin Ryan from Portland, Maine. So what I will cover, I always say, tell folks what you're going to cover. So I'm going to cover asking for your meeting with a lawmaker or staff, prepping for your meeting with a lawmaker or staff, running your meeting with a lawmaker or staff, and following up on your meeting with a lawmaker or staff. Next slide, please. So the first topic, asking for your meeting with a lawmaker or staff. Which lawmakers? I think that's probably the first question. And I think in most jurisdictions, it should be both senators and all the representatives in your service area. Don't settle for just the one House lawmaker who represents where you live. Think about, all the people you serve. Which lawmakers represent those people in the U.S. House of Representatives? Those should be your target. Focus more broadly. Did you check the congressional schedule? When Congress is not in session, lawmakers are usually not in D.C. That doesn't necessarily mean they're at home, but they're likely to be at home. They could be, on a CODEL visiting overseas, but they're most likely to be at home. The schedule can change, as indeed it is changing this week. But in the House and Senate, but please check in with us at the Alliance for help. Now, where to meet? That's actually a pretty important question because you've got choices. You meet in the personal office in Washington, D.C. On the House, that's the Cannon, Longworth, and Rayburn House office buildings. And in the Senate, it's the Hart, Dirksen, and Russell Senate office buildings. And sometimes you might meet near a committee office, perhaps in the hallway outside, or off the House or Senate floor. Sometimes the lawmaker can't get away from congressional obligations, perhaps related to committee or voting responsibilities. You lose time walking to get to the committee office or the floor, but it's better than having your meeting canceled, right? You'll probably have to make a streamlined presentation in order to offset the lost time. Now, another option for where to meet is back home. You can meet in your lawmaker's local office or state office, ideally the most conveniently located, but please note that some offices are open only a few days per week. You could also meet at your facility, perhaps as part of a site visit, or maybe a neutral site like a church or a union hall. And then finally, of course, you can meet virtually, thanks to COVID. So what would work best for you? DC is exciting and you can visit several congressional offices in one day, but scheduling is trickier and coming to DC is expensive and it means a smaller group of supporters because of the cost. Now, meeting in person back home is convenient. It's easier to schedule and you can involve more people. Virtual is the easiest meeting of all, especially for urgent matters, time-sensitive matters, but there's much less human contact and it shows less commitment since anyone nowadays can roll out of bed and get on Zoom. Next slide, please. So how to ask for a meeting. It's actually simpler than you might think. Visit your lawmaker's website, perhaps using congress.gov. And from congress.gov, you can find every congressional website, or you can just Google your member of Congress if you know the name. So usually you submit a form through a portal on the lawmaker's website, or you submit a request to a particular email address. And if it's not clear, I would suggest calling the DC or state or district office of the lawmaker in question, or don't hesitate to ask us at the Alliance. The information required is usually the same. The forms may vary, but you're usually asked to provide the following information: the name and contact information for your leader, so they can get in touch with folks in case schedules change. Names and addresses for people in your group. At least one of them should be a constituent. Which issues you want to discuss, and when you are available to meet. And I recommend including also why the lawmaker should meet with you. Why are you and your group worth the time? Why should the lawmaker care about the topics you wish to address and the request you want to make? Because offices get a lot of requests. They don't meet with everybody. Next slide, please. I recommend following up. Be polite but persistent. The squeaky wheel does get the grease. Lawmakers usually get more requests than there are slots in the schedule. So the people who show the most commitment to getting a meeting are often the ones who are successful in getting that meeting. Now, if you're having problems, I would suggest calling a district or state office. Those folks are there to look out for their boss's reputation, and their boss's reputation suffers if it's known in the community that they're not blowing off, that they're blowing off people who want to meet with the lawmaker. So ask the district or state office staff if they can be of help if you're not hearing from the DC office. Also, ask for help for figures of influence in your community. Maybe it's a donor. Maybe it's a member of your board of directors. Maybe it's the mayor. Maybe it's the corporate attorney who handles your legal affairs pro bono publico. You do know door openers, whether or not you think so. So don't be afraid to ask them for help in getting a meeting with your lawmaker. For DC meetings, particularly, here are three pieces of information I pass on. You may not know you are meeting with the lawmaker until the day of. Similarly, don't be surprised if the lawmaker you were told was going to be present is for some reason needed elsewhere. My advice is to roll with it. The second point, you may be asked to shift to another time slot on very short notice. Again, to the extent your schedule can accommodate this change, I would roll with it. And then finally, I would allow for extra time for DC meetings. It's convenient to have all these lawmakers in one place, but because of security, those magnetometers are often turned up to 11. And long walks in between, especially if you're going from the House to the Senate on a hot summer day, or vice versa, it's going to take a lot longer than you think. Staff meetings are okay. It is not an insult to meet with staff. Most of your meetings will be with staff. Most congressional meetings, period, are with staff. Staffers are intelligent. They are hardworking. They are conscientious. They are overworked and underpaid. And I say that regardless of policy, regardless of party, regardless of philosophy, or their views on homelessness. I think they're really a very impressive bunch of people. And they tend to be quite young because of the long work hours and the relatively low pay. And these often, unless you get on a committee, you probably don't spend much time. It might be a year, 2 years, 3 years. There's a lot of churn, and a lot of advocacy involves educating the successor, the next staffer who comes in. Next slide, please. And I should say, just to follow up, DC staff are much more policy oriented. They will make the recommendations to the boss as to how to address your requests. District and state staff, they are people pleasers. They are much more interested in what's going on in the state or district and what that means for their boss. They will probably only forward policy requests to DC staff or inquire on your behalf with DC staff when they are slow to respond to you, which is obviously very helpful. But their proximity also gives you an opportunity, proximity meaning that they're right in your community. It gives you an opportunity to cultivate them and involve them in your work, including inviting them to board meetings, building openings, outreach efforts, and point in time counts. They could be real allies, even if they're not the policy experts. Okay, so now we're at prepping for your meeting. And I do not recommend going into a meeting without preparation. I think that's a mistake. I guess the first question is, what are two or maybe three of your most important policy requests? You usually won't have much time, usually no more than half an hour, if then. And especially if you have a large group, that time goes by fast. So it's best to focus on one or two, but no more than three policy requests. And I should say that there's nothing more important than deciding on your meeting request. Everything else related to the meetings should be based on this decision. For example, when you're assembling your team, Avengers Assemble, when you're deciding who can be the most helpful to you in making arguments in support of your request, that should be based not on, who's your friend or who's available, but who's going to be the most help in that meeting. So, for example, if you were most concerned about preserving permanent supportive housing, who would you want in your group? PHAs and landlords, which rely on COC rental assistance? Maybe. Developers who rely on COC funds combined with low-income housing tax credit or CDFI funds and public and private capital to build new housing? Maybe. Local government officials who know PSH is so much cheaper than the alternatives? Maybe. Big healthcare groups, which want to use their emergency rooms for the provision of emergency care. I think they might be a possibility as well. And then, how can you best utilize people with lived experience, particularly if they are storytellers? Storytelling is all the rage with congressional offices. Nobody asked me for a point paper. They asked me for storytellers. Every lawmaker is looking for a good story to illustrate a complicated public policy argument. Often what lawmakers and staff remember from your meetings are the stories, not the meticulously detailed talking points. So, as Tamina said, storytelling is extremely powerful. Fortunately, people in homelessness know more inspiring and despairing stories than anyone else in the world. So what do you know about your lawmaker's record or agenda on homelessness? Ask around, don't just go in cold. Local government officials are usually good sources of information about where the lawmaker stands on housing and homelessness. Visit the lawmaker's website, particularly the policy and media sections. What do they like? What do they dislike? What do they talk about? And what do they not talk about? Google the lawmaker's name and homelessness. I've done it. No shame in doing that. That's often very helpful. And then what does NAH say? Don't hesitate to get in touch with us at the Alliance. We'd be happy to provide you with our views. Next slide, please. So ask yourself, does the lawmaker serve in a leadership position or on relevant committees? That's important. Leadership positions include things like speaker, majority or minority leader, majority or minority whip, conference or caucus, chair or vice chair. So those are examples of leadership positions. And then the committees that are of particular interest, the House Financial Services Committee and the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. Those are the authorizing committees for HUD. They determine which programs HUD will carry out and the rules that govern those programs. Obviously, very influential lawmakers as far as the programs you care about are concerned. And then there are the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation HUD and the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation HUD. Those are the committees which determine funding levels for the programs we care about. So leaders or lawmakers who serve on the right committees have a lot more influence over housing and homelessness policies than other lawmakers. And lawmakers who serve on those committees will likely know a lot more about housing and homelessness. So see if you're, this is a final point, and it's not really covered, I don't think, in the slide, but I wouldn't want this opportunity to pass without mentioning earmarks or congressionally directed funding. See if your lawmakers ask for earmarks or congressionally directed funding. And that's a process by which sums as large as several $1 million can literally be written into legislation to benefit local governments or nonprofits for affordable housing and homelessness efforts. Now, not all lawmakers do participate, but participation among Republicans is growing, and participation among Democrats has always been strong. So if they do, if you find out that they do ask for earmarks, make sure, excuse me, that you get on their listserv for earmarks to keep you up to date as to what you need to do in order to qualify. Next slide, please. So how to make the request. My approach is simple. It's problem, solution, request. Make sure that at some point during the meeting, you're talking about all three of those components. Show what the problem is, identify the solution, and make the policy request. For HUD's 2025 COC NOFO, a lot of people are concerned about how the belated nature of the NOFO and how that will lead to funding interruptions. So, in that case, the problem is the latest ever issued COC NOFO will inevitably result in funding interruptions in 2026, perhaps up until June. The solution is to negate HUD's issuance in 2025 of a belated COC NOFO. And the policy request, enact language which directs HUD to renew all grant agreements that expire next year. Next slide, please. So my suggestion is when you start meetings is to lay the groundwork. Set the scene. What is homelessness like in your state or district? What are you seeing more of? Where are you seeing improvements? I would recommend talking about subpopulations if you don't know the lawmaker well. Do they care about children and youth? Do they care about families? Do they care about chronic homelessness? Do they care about the elderly? Do they care about veterans? See if there are any subpopulations that the office is particularly interested in or sympathetic for. Show your importance to the community. Are you the biggest shelter in the district? Did you win a special rural and unsheltered SNOFO award? How successful is your PSH in keeping people from going back into homelessness? Did you effectively eliminate veteran homelessness? Why should the lawmaker pay attention to you? Who are your allies and supporters in the community? I would also recommend talking about your accomplishments as well as your challenges. Remind the lawmaker of what you do well for homeless people. Don't make your challenges seem unavoidable, seem unsolvable, or else what's the point in helping on funding and policy concerns if there's no hope? And then I would recommend localizing your request. How would it benefit constituents back home? I'm always delighted when I see activists mention the Alliance's request for homeless assistance grants. But I would recommend pivoting immediately thereafter to so you can talk about how that would benefit the folks back home. How many more people, for example, would be housed with the increase that you requested? I think it's important to understand what motivates your lawmaker. How can you appeal to them? What do they like? What do they dislike? Do they have values or mutual friends you can invoke? Or are there certain things you shouldn't talk about given their dislikes? Are there favorable precedents you can invoke in support of your request? Who else supports what you're trying to do? Where else has this been successful? And then finally, I would think about how to streamline your requests for lawmakers with little time or short attention spans, something which is often known as the elevator pitch. If you have 30 seconds to make your request, what vital information would you include in that short amount of time? Sometimes it's known as a walk with me request because the lawmaker will put their arm around your shoulders and say, walk with me. And that's a sign that you have 15 to 30 seconds to make your request before they move on. Next slide, please. So running your meeting with lawmakers or staff, we're on that topic now. Remember that you are the expert, so don't feel intimidated. You just have to make your requests urgent and easily understood for staff who know a fraction of what you know and are being pulled in 100 different directions by their ever-demanding bosses. Always allow time to listen and respond to questions. If you and your crew are doing all the talking, you aren't going to learn anything. Better not to use all of your talking points in order to get the lawmaker or the staffer talking. Always be truthful. And I'm not just saying that because truth is and honesty is virtuous, but if you'll wreck your credibility if you're perceived as misleading people. If you don't know something, say so. People on the Hill understand that we can't know everything, and then just get back to them with the necessary information once you've had a chance to look it up. Um, you're unlikely to get answers back at the end of meetings unless you're asking them to do something simple or something that they have done before. And that's because offices usually have to perform their due diligence. That is to say, determine whether their boss should do what you want them to do based on party, politics, and policy, although hopefully perhaps not in that order. Next slide, please. For staff meetings, and this is particularly true in DC, when you're doing meetings back to back to back, back to back to back, don't give the same presentation every time. Tailor your presentation to the staffer. This is particularly true in DC when you're doing several meetings in a row. It can be tempting to go robot and just spit out the same talking points in the same way, but that would be mistaken. You know, people in homelessness know there's nobody better in sizing up people with just a few pieces of evidence. So I would do that with the Hill staff that you're working with. Is the staffer a veteran or a rookie? Does the staffer know our service area? Does the staffer know our programs? Look for clues in the office. You know, do they have a pennant for a football team not in your state? Well, that probably means they don't know your area that well. Um, and use small talk productively. It is not intrusive to ask questions like, how long have you worked for the representative? What issues do you cover? Are you from the state? Do you have much experience with homelessness? And then I would also, think about how you're being perceived by the staffer. Are you being understood? Is the staffer getting glassy-eyed? If so, wake them up with questions. Or is the staffer lost and wide-eyed? Maybe you need to slow down or provide more detail and additional context. Next slide, please. Sometimes the representative or senator will enter a meeting late or unexpectedly. My advice is to run through introductions quickly, especially if you've got a distinguished crew, and then go back to your most important request. No matter where you were in the discussion with a staffer, go back to your most important request once the lawmaker's in the room and go with your streamlined presentation. So what's your leave behind? Your fact sheet, your talking points, your one pager. Do you hand it over before or after your meeting? That's an age-old question that lobbyists have pondered for centuries. I hand over my leave behind in advance so they can follow the presentation more easily. But there are a lot of lobbyists who only give their leave behind afterwards because they think it distracts from the presentation. But please do have a leave behind. Staffers take a lot of meetings. Don't rely on them to remember your best arguments. Next slide, please. So following up on your meeting with lawmakers or staff, this is the final section. No later than the next day, in your follow-up email to thank the relevant staffer for the meeting, you should include or attach your leave behind. Staff can get overwhelmed with paper, and often they'll throw out the paper leave behinds, but they like having electronic copies a few keystrokes away. Perhaps use that follow-up email to extend an invitation for a site visit to the lawmaker or district state staff if the meeting went well, or even if the meeting didn't go well. Maybe this is a chance to recharge the relationship. Perhaps provide any additional information requested by the office or which you promised to provide. And then 3 weeks later, say, follow up on any policy requests you make, to co-sponsor this bill or to send this letter. That's a great way to show commitment that you aren't going away, because most folks do. They have a meeting and then that's it. If the answer is no to your policy request, think of alternative requests. They may feel more obligated to help you the second time, having blown you off the first time. Submitting a second request soon after rejection of your first request shows you aren't going away, you're committed, they're going to have to deal with you. Next slide, please. So, how do you know if you have a good relationship with your lawmaker? Well, these are three questions which you might consider asking. It's like a stress test for banks, but this is just, with your lawmaker and how well you work with him. Does the staff proactively reach out to you for regular check-in meetings? That's a good sign. Do staff contact you about pending homelessness legislation and its effect on your district or state? They should. You guys are the experts. And if they do, that means you have a good relationship. Does a district or state office reach out to you to participate in district or state press events? That's a great sign. They consider you to be not only an expert, but an ally as well. And I guess, my bottom line is, and I'll leave you with this thought, if you're building a congressional relationship, here's what I'd aim for. You may meet with the DC office only once a year, but you spend time with the state or district office staff during the rest of the year. And when you reach out to the DC office, whenever, for example, key votes come up or a sign-on letter opportunity arises, um, whenever you reach out to ask for their help on that, you feel that your requests are being fairly considered by the office. I think that's a realistic goal for everybody. So thanks for your time. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to address them. And if we can ever be of any help in working with you on setting up meetings and participating in meetings, please don't hesitate to let us know.
Oh, that's a cue for me. Thanks, John. Before we get to the questions, I want to challenge you to jot down in the chat one action you'll take in the next month. It can be small advocacy, it could be more extensive advocacy. You could be meeting with a local official, sharing your story, or even just signing up for an advocacy alert. Every action contributes to a bigger moment. Always remember that. So if you can jot in the chat one advocacy action you think you'll be taking next month, and if this training has been helpful to you. Thank you all for being part of this work and for everything that you do. We look forward to seeing you again. With that, I will pass it to Alec, who is tracking our Q&A box.
Awesome. Thank you, Tamina and John. As folks are responding to that question in the chat, and I'm going to put the link on the slide up here in the action alerts in just a second. We got a couple of good questions for Tamina and John in the chat here in the Q&A box. Please continue to use the Q&A box for any questions that you want our wonderful panelists to answer. So John, I'm going to tee this one up for you. Do you have any specific recommendations for the one-pager or leave behind materials when meeting with congressional staff? Like what kind of content should be on it? And something that we kind of go back and forward on sometimes is when should you actually present it to the staff or the lawmaker? Can you walk us through a little bit more on like the art of the one-pager?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. And it really does vary depending on the lawmaker and the request. But I would make sure that you have problem solution requests. That somewhere on that one page, you make sure you define the problem, and identify a solution and make a policy request, and then just provide plenty of local detail as to why this lawmaker should care about this particular problem, and not what's happening in California or what's happening nationally, what's happening in the lawmaker's state or district. I think that's usually sufficient. Oh, and in terms of when to present, it's all a matter of comfort. I tend to follow, when I'm doing a presentation, I follow the material on the fact sheet. So I think it helps to reinforce because folks are generally pretty good at reading and listening and integrating the two, especially if they're consistent accounts. But as I said during the presentation, some people think it's a huge distraction and they want to wait until afterwards. So it's whatever you're comfortable with.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Now we're going to kind of go into the art of calling Congress. This one is for either you, John, or Tamina, or both of you to jump in here. We've got a question here around, our organization, other organizations obviously ask the general public to call Congress, to voice different issues and concerns. How effective is this? And like, what are the most effective strategies when we think around contacting members of Congress in slightly less direct ways than, for example, in compared to organizing the meetings that we have been talking about earlier today?
Tamina, did you want me
Wanna-
to?
You can go first.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's an excellent question, because I think a lot of our interactions with Congress are wasted on things which don't matter. I'm not a fan of canned emails. Um, I'm not a fan of quick phone calls. Um, if you're doing a phone call and they're not writing down your personal information, including how they can get back to you, then they're not taking you seriously. You have to get a huge number of canned emails in order to influence an office, because there's nothing easier than just putting in your zip code and sending off a canned email. It shows no commitment. I think what congressional officers are looking for are signs of commitment, that something really matters to you, that you took the time to produce something yourself. You didn't just, take what someone else gave you and send it along. I think ideally, you find out who your staffer is on housing and homelessness issues in a particular office, so you can communicate directly with them. And sometimes that's hard information to come by, but if you ever have any questions, I'd be happy to try to connect you. But my ideal is to send an email or a letter, but email preferably, because letters, because of anthrax and other things, they don't get to congressional offices for weeks afterwards. I would send an email directly to the staffer and lay out in detail why you're making a certain request and why you think it's important. And again, localize it, why the lawmaker should care about what's happening in their state or district. And then I would also follow up with a meeting, because requesting a meeting and participating in a meeting shows an incredible amount of commitment. They can tell that this is not someone they can fob off, that this is someone that they're going to have to deal with. And there is no reason at all why people in housing and homelessness in back home, you shouldn't be meeting regularly with their members of Congress. Members of Congress should be seeking you out, if anything. So, I would make your communication personal and direct. Don't go through the receptionist. Go directly to the staffer with your own personal message. Sorry, Tamina.
No, that was excellent, and you covered most of it. I think one other thing I would add, and John already mentioned this in his presentation, is that try to build relationship with their district offices. And that's where you would have the most leverage, because you are, as their constituent, as potential voters, your well-being is literally their job is to serve you in Congress. So I would encourage you to find out who are the individuals that are in their district offices, build relationships with them, and this was I thought this was very helpful. I worked for a state senator some years ago, and there were a group of constituents who would send us holiday cards at the holidays. So that's also nice too. So put your own touch to how you build these relationships, and you can go from there.
Thank you both. I think I see a couple of people with their hands raised. If you could just please put your question in the Q&A box, that's the best way for us to get to it. We're going to do a couple of quick fire ones. Tamina, does NEH hold standing or regular advocacy calls to organize the field?
So some of you may already know we do the annual Capitol Hill Day every year. And that's around May or June when we have our conference. Usually this year we did it virtually, but it's usually in person. And so that happens once a year, every year. On top of that, we have certain policy priorities that we identified throughout the year. And we reach out to our advocacy groups in different states to help us add their voice with their members of Congress. So that happens throughout the year. depending on what our priorities are. For instance, right now, our priority is to stop the NOFO notice of funding uh, opportunities for the COC program. So that's our top priority right now, but it changes depending on the political climate at that. So just keep an eye on the action alerts. If you haven't signed up for action alerts, please do, and you will be on top of what our campaigns are and throughout the year.
Thank you, Tamina. Going right back to you, John, we spent a lot of time in this presentation talking around, connecting with staff and how valuable that is. But how do you actually find like who the most relevant staff member is to try to meet with?
Well, what I do is I have a commercial directory, and the Alliance pays a pretty sum for it. So that helps me, but it's not entirely accurate because staff turnover is so great. So I also usually call up offices and ask, and most offices are initially resistant to providing that information. So I have to identify who I am and where I work and explain why I want to find out who the staffer is. And I emphasize I'm just asking for an email address. And that's usually the best way to do it. Who handles housing and homelessness? And in most offices, the staffer who handles housing also handles homelessness. There are some Republican offices I've dealt with where they don't have a staffer on homelessness, and you sort of get, the youngest staffer in the office. But that's usually the best way. And yeah, and if you're as Tamina said, another approach would be to go to the district or state offices and ask them, I want to develop a relationship with your staffer who handles housing and homelessness in DC. What do you recommend? Because that staffer should want to know who you are, what you do, and what it is you need to do your work. So that would be my suggestion. If you strike out with the DC office, try the district or state office and explain why it is. You're not there to waste their time or to say hello. You've got serious business you need to attend to that is very important for the district or state.
Perfect. Thank you. And then let's talk a little bit more around how to engage folks who are already aligned. We got a great question in the chat here. That's when lawmakers are already aligned and are proactively working towards the goals that we collectively are advocating for. What is the point of meetings? Like, what should those meetings look like? How do the talking points change? How do we best like engage our champions to kind of go an extra step?
Well, I'll take a first crack at that. And say that, well, I think we had a good illustration over the weekend about why it's so important that our friends be champions, not just friends. The CR omitted the provision that we were seeking to include in order to renew grants in 2025 and avoid a belated and ill-conceived COC NOFO. So, even if you're dealing with a friendly office, there's more that they can do to be helping. And so I think we need to challenge our friends to be champions. Democrats tend to be more supportive of what we're doing on homelessness, but in many cases, there's a whole lot more they could do. Whether it's putting in earmarks for homeless for shelters, whether it's leading more letters or urging the chair or ranking member to include more funding for the homeless assistance grants. I think it's important that we make sure our Democratic friends and friends generally don't take us for granted, and that we're continuing to challenge them to do more. Because look at the situation that we're in. Homelessness is at an historic high. Vulnerability to homelessness is at an historic high. Clearly we need more urgent action from our friends in Washington, and those folks and those lawmakers are far more likely to pay attention to what they hear from their constituents back home than they are from a flack in DC like me.
And if I can add one more thing, also your Democratic representatives may know the Republican who is a chair or a member of a committee, and they might have worked on a bipartisan bill a while back or recently, so they might have relationships. So it's still important, as John mentioned, to have those conversations with them and build them up as an ally beyond what they're doing.
Perfect. And looks like we got one more question in the chat related to lived experience. So, like, what is the role of national level organizations like the National Alliance to do this work at a national level and also encourage local affiliates to do the work of engaging folks with lived expertise in congressional advocacy? Do we have any more tips for how to do that in the best way to make sure that partnership is authentic and effective?
I can go first. You raised a very important point. It is, as I mentioned in my presentation, there are various levels of advocacy that then they're all interconnected. So we are here at the Alliance, we're thinking about broadening our advocacy infrastructure and also bringing the focus at state and local level. So we are very cognizant of the value that you all add. We've always been cognizant, but now we're actually building out a whole infrastructure. So they're all connecting and talking to each other.
And just real quickly, congressional staff, I hate to generalize, but, they tend to be well-educated, upper middle class. I found this out when I was lobbying for labor. There weren't many folks with a blue collar background, and so this is a long-winded way of saying, not a whole lot of Hill staffers are familiar with homelessness. I have met some staffers who have been homeless themselves, but, involving people with lived experience, I think, is a great way to acquaint staffers with homelessness. They can hear firsthand accounts of what it's like and what approaches are helpful and what approaches are unhelpful.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We covered a lot of great ground. We're going to be closing out right now with just 2 minutes left. So thank you, everyone, so much for your participation in the chat, all the amazing questions you have, for joining us today. We are going to be sending out the slides and the recording. So let's continue the conversation. I am putting our wonderful panelists' emails up on the screen right here if you have any questions about advocacy and lobbying. And yeah, we're going to keep up the conversation. We'll put also in the recap email how to sign up for our action alerts. We do also have monthly spaces for kind of advocacy office hours to get folks up to speed. We have a monthly newsletter as well, what we call the bulletin. And so there are lots of opportunities for us to stay connected and for you all to hear a little bit more around what's going on the Hill and in DC. And we also need to similarly hear from you all around what you're hearing from lawmakers, what's bubbling up for you at the local and the state level. We are trying to do that in partnership with you, and we can't do it without all the amazing work that you are doing on the ground. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you very shortly, and don't be a stranger. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. See you next time.